Welcome, weary traveler. You've left the noise of the world behind and stepped into a realm untouched by time. Here, candlelight dances upon ancient stone walls, and the air carries the soft hum of forgotten lullabies. Beyond these gates, the night is gentle, and every story is a silver thread, weaving warmth around your heart. So rest your mind. Let each word be a quiet step into the halls of dreams until sleep, tender and deep, finds you. You are safe here, and the world drifts away.
Chapter 1. The Gentle Dawn. The village of Greendale rested quietly in the fold of a wide green valley, tucked between low hills that rolled like waves upon a peaceful sea of earth. At night, the hills cradled the village in a deep embrace, as if the land itself wished to shelter it from the winds of the world. In the day, soft meadows stretched outward, filled with wildflowers and slow-drifting bees that hummed in lazy spirals above the fields. Greendale was small, only a scattering of cottages with thatched roofs and wooden shutters, but it was known throughout the kingdom for its quietness. Travelers who passed through often remarked that the air here seemed softer, the streams clearer, and the very light of the sun gentler. It was the kind of place where time slowed, where the rhythm of life kept to the gentle pace of a hearth fire and the song of birds at the edge of the wood. On this particular morning, the first of our tale, dawn crept into Greendale like a soft, patient guest. The eastern sky blushed with pale pink, and the last silver stars retreated above the far hills. A thin mist curled along the stream that wound through the center of the village, drifting in delicate ribbons across the meadow. Within one of the cottages, a man named Klaus stirred from sleep. Though once a knight of renown, Klaus no longer wore armor or carried sword for battle. He had walked the long roads of the kingdom, seen courts glitter with splendor, and heard the clash of steel in distant fields. Yet those years had slipped gently into memory, leaving behind not longing, but a deep hunger for stillness. He had found that stillness here in Greendale. The cottage was simple: oak beams, a hearth of smooth stone, shelves lined with jars of herbs. Klaus rose slowly, stretching as the beams of sunlight touched the wooden floor. The air was cool and carried the scent of damp grass. On the table, beneath a cloth, a round loaf of bread awaited, alongside a small pot of golden honey. He poured warm milk into a clay cup and sat by the window, where a soft light fell across his shoulders. He ate without hurry, savoring each bite as if it were a prayer, while his eyes rested on the mist curling across the meadow. Outside, the village began to stir. A cart rolled gently over the cobblestones, its wooden wheels creaking like an old lullaby. A pair of children, little Leora and Bren, ran toward the stream, laughing softly as they carried nets for minnows. Smoke drifted upward from chimneys, blending with the scent of fresh bread from Isolde's oven. The innkeeper, Merrick, stepped into the square with a yawn, lighting the lantern that always hung by his door, though the day was already brightening. Klaus stepped into the morning. The grass sparkled with dew, and the breeze carried the faint perfume of wild thyme. He walked toward the edge of the village, where the fields stretched in golden rows. The farmers, old Thalric and his daughter Serena, moved steadily among the crops, pausing often to lean on their tools and smile at the rising sun. Beyond the fields, a brook wound like silver thread through the meadow. Its waters gurgled softly, playful and clear, reflecting the soft sky above. Klaus knelt at its bank, dipped his hands into the cool current, and let the water stream slowly through his fingers. He lingered there, listening to the brook's quiet song, the rhythm steady, like the breath of the earth itself. He followed the stream on foot, walking slowly through tall grasses that swayed in the wind. Birds flitted overhead, their wings catching the sunlight in quick, bright flashes. A heron stood in the shallows, unmoving, a sentinel of stillness in the morning air. Klaus felt no need to disturb it. He only watched, breathing deeply, as if the silence of the heron could seep into his vision. After some time, he reached a wooden bridge where he often paused. From here, Greendale spread out before him. Cottages clustered close together like friends, smoke curling upward in gentle spirals, and the soft slopes of hills rising beyond. To Klaus, it always looked less like a village and more like a dream, painted slowly, each stroke laid with patience and care. Leaning against the railing, Klaus thought of the people who made Greendale what it was. He thought of Isolde, who baked more bread than her own family needed so that none would go hungry. Of Merrick, who lit his lantern each morning and each evening, not for himself, but for those who might find their way home late. Of Thalric and Serenia, whose work in the fields fed more than bellies. It fed the spirit of togetherness. Here, life was not rushed nor restless. It was woven carefully, thread by thread, into a tapestry of kindness. The sun climbed higher, warming his shoulders, and Klaus closed his eyes. The peace of the valley seemed to flow into him with every breath. In this place, he felt safe, grounded, far from all urgency. He let the thought linger, like a soft blanket laid across the mind. When at last he returned to the village, the square was alive in its quiet way. Corvian, the old lute player, sat upon the fountain's stone edge, fingers coaxing a melody as gentle as falling petals. Children gathered around him, their eyes half closed, swaying to the notes. Others moved about with baskets or tools, but none hurried, none pressed. Even the sound of the carts upon the cobblestone seemed softened, as if the village itself wished to hum along with Corvian's song. Klaus sat nearby, letting the music wash over him. Each note drifted, and as Klaus looked upon the faces of his neighbors, he felt a deep gratitude that his path, winding and long, had ended here, in a place where every dawn was gentle and every evening promised rest. And so the day continued, without haste, without burden. And Klaus of Greendale returned at last to his cottage, where the hearth waited, where the fire would glow, and where the night would arrive quietly, carrying with it the silver light of the moon. Chapter 2, The Meadow Walk. The morning in Greendale moved as it always did, without hurry. The sun drifted higher, soft and golden, brushing its light across the valley. The mist had faded, leaving behind dew that still clung to the grasses, tiny droplets that sparkled like a scattering of gems. The air was warm now, but still fresh, carrying the faint, sweet perfume of blossoms and the earthy scent of damp soil. Klaus stepped out of his cottage, fastening the leather strap of his cloak. He often took walks in the meadows when the day was new, when the air seemed to hum with stillness. These walks were never about reaching anywhere, nor about covering distance. They were simply about moving gently through the land, listening, watching, breathing in the slow rhythm of the valley. The path that led from Greendale into the meadow was narrow and winding. It was bordered by hedgerows and wildflowers, soft white daisies, tall stalks of lavender, and pale blue cornflowers that tilted in the breeze. Bees hovered lazily, drifting from bloom to bloom, their wings glinting in the light. Klaus walked slowly, pausing often to notice the tiny details. A beetle crawling across a leaf, the shimmer of dew in a spider's web, the flutter of a finch's wings as it darted between branches. He found a kind of comfort in these small things. Once, he had marched with men who counted victories and losses, who spoke of crowns and kingdoms. Now, he counted only the quiet signs of the earth, the way a cloud drifted, the way a blade of grass swayed, the way the wind whispered through the hedges. As he moved further into the meadow, the land opened wide around him. Tall grasses rolled like waves, bending softly with the breeze. Here and there stood clusters of wild apple trees, their branches heavy with green fruit that would ripen by autumn. Klaus paused beneath one of these trees, leaning against its trunk. The bark was rough against his palm, grounding steady. Overhead, the leaves shifted gently, sending flecks of light across his face. From this spot, he could see the hills beyond Greendale. They rose in smooth slopes, their tops dotted with groves of oak and elm. The world beyond those hills was vast, filled with castles and markets, wars and wonders. But here, in this valley, none of that pressed in. The hills seemed like protective walls, keeping the peace of Greendale safe, holding it close like a secret. A soft sound reached Klaus's ears then, a voice humming. He turned and saw Serenia, Thauric's daughter, walking the path toward him. She carried a small basket of herbs, her steps unhurried, her face lit with the calm of someone who belonged to the land itself. "Good morning, Klaus," she said when she drew near, her voice as gentle as the meadow wind. "And to you, Serenia," he replied, inclining his head. "The meadow seems especially kind today." She smiled faintly. It always does if one takes the time to notice. They stood together beneath the apple tree for a while, saying little. Words were not always needed in Greendale. The land itself seemed to speak if one listened long enough. The rustle of grasses, the call of a skylark, the steady hush of... Klaus watched her until she vanished into the curve of the meadow path, then turned his gaze once more to the hills. He continued onward, each step measured and unhurried. A breeze stirred the grasses, sending ripples across the meadow like the surface of a pond. Butterflies flitted in bright colors, orange, white, pale yellow, each one drifting as if caught in a slow dance. Klaus walked until he reached a small rise in the land, where a wooden bench had been built long ago, its wood worn smooth by time and weather. He sat upon it, gazing out across the valley. From here, Greendale was visible in its entirety. The cottages clustered together, smoke trailing gently from chimneys, the glimmer of the brook winding through its heart. Beyond, the hills framed it like a cradle. The sight filled Klaus with a profound sense of stillness, as though the village itself breathed slowly, steadily, lulling all who lived there into a deep calm. He leaned back on the bench, closed his eyes, and let the sounds of the meadow fill him. The whisper of grass, the distant call of a bird, the faint buzz of insects, steady as the ticking of clock. It was a symphony without haste, a harmony without urgency. It reminded him that peace was not the absence of sound, but the presence of balance, the way each small thing found its place and moved gently in time. Time slipped by unnoticed as he sat there. The sun warmed his face, the breeze cooled his skin, and the world seemed to fold around him like a blanket. When he opened his eyes again, the sky had deepened into a brighter blue, dotted with soft white clouds. Klaus rose slowly, stretching, and began his walk back toward the village. His steps traced the same path but felt lighter now, as if the meadow had shared some of its. When he reached Greendale once more, the square was alive in its gentle rhythm. Merrick carried a tray of mugs out to his inn's tables, where travelers rested in the shade. Isolde pulled loaves of bread from her oven, the scent drifting warmly across the cobblestones. And Corvian, seated upon his fountain's stone edge, plucked the strings of his lute in another slow, lilting tune. Klaus felt the meadow still within him, carried like a quiet song in the chest. He returned to his cottage, set the sprig of mint upon the table, and poured himself a cup of tea. As the leaves steeped, he sat by the window and gazed at the meadow stretching beyond the village, the grasses still swaying, the horizon still soft and endless. The tea was warm, the mint soothing. The day drifted onward, and Klaus let himself drift with it, unhurried, resting in the rhythm of Greendale. Chapter 3, The Evening Hearth. Evening in Greendale arrived the way a candle flame softens in a steady glow, slowly, without demand, and full of calm. The sun drifted behind the hills, leaving long golden threads across the sky, until the light deepened into rose, then lavender, and finally a soft blue-gray that wrapped itself around the cottages like a shawl. Klaus walked the quiet lane toward Merrick's inn, his cloak brushing against the cobblestones in an unhurried rhythm. The air was cool, touched by the scent of wood smoke rising from chimneys, each spiral curling gently into the dusk. Windows glowed one by one as candles and lanterns were lit inside, the warm light spilling outward in amber squares. A hush settled across the village. Not silence, but the gentle hum of life winding down. The inn stood near the square, its door wide open, releasing a soft current of warmth and savory fragrance. Klaus stepped inside and was greeted at once by the gentle crackle of a great hearth fire, its flames dancing slowly over thick logs. Shadows swayed against the stone walls, their movement unhurried, as if even the fire wished only to rest in place. Merrick, broad and kindly, carried a tray of wooden mugs across the room. "Evening, Klaus," he said with a nod, his voice calm, carrying the ease of someone long at home in such surroundings. "The hearth is strong tonight. Find a seat where it suits you." Klaus inclined his head, his lips softening into a small smile. "Evening, Merrick." The fire's glow reaches even the road outside. He found a place near the hearth where the warmth touched his legs and the light flickered gently across the grain of the oak table. The bench beneath him was worn smooth from countless evenings just like this, steady, quiet, timeless. He removed his gloves, set them on the table, and stretched his fingers toward the fire, feeling the heat soak into them. Around him, the inn moved at its own slow pace. Two farmers spoke in low voices near the corner, their words carrying the rhythm of long friendship more than the weight of meaning. An elder dozed quietly in a chair, his mug untouched before him, the firelight glinting off his silver hair. From the kitchen drifted the smell of roasted roots and herbs, a fragrance earthy and grounding, touched with a hint of garlic and thyme. Before long, Serena entered, her basket now empty, her hands folded loosely before her. She greeted Merrick with a quiet smile and settled near the fire, nodding softly at Klaus as she arranged her skirts. Soon, the bard Corvian lifted his lute from where it leaned against the wall, his fingers plucking slow, wandering notes. The melody was unhurried, like a stream winding through mossy stones, each note dissolving gently into the next. Klaus closed his eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over him. It did not stir him into wakefulness. It settled him deeper into stillness, like the steady rocking of a boat upon a calm lake. The lute's soft hum blended with the fire's crackle, the murmur of voices, and the faint sigh of wind at the window. Each sound belonged, woven into the tapestry of evening. Merrick placed a bowl before Klaus, a stew of lentils, carrots, and herbs, its steam rising in soft curls. Beside it rested a thick slice of bread, the crust golden, the inside still warm. Klaus lifted the spoon slowly, savoring the first taste. The broth was simple yet full, each flavor blending into the next, leaving no sharp edges, only warmth. He chewed the bread in quiet rhythm, each bite grounding him in the moment, each swallow a small reassurance. Across the room, Serena spoke softly to Leora, the young girl clutching her bundle of meadow flowers. They arranged the blooms in a small clay vase by the window, their laughter gentle and contained, the kind that left the air softer after it passed. The sight warmed Klaus more deeply than the fire. It was a reminder that peace could be woven not only into landscapes, but into small acts of care, like placing flowers in water or sharing bread at the table. As the evening deepened, the inn glowed more warmly, each candle lending its own pool of light, until the whole room seemed bathed in amber. Outside, the sky shifted toward indigo, stars appearing like shy glimmers through the village's smoke-softened veil. The moon, pale and calm, rose over the hills, casting a silver outline upon the thatched roofs. Corvian's song drifted to its close, the final notes trembling gently before fading into silence. He rested his lute against his knee and let the quiet linger, unbroken. For a moment, the entire inn seemed to breathe together, the fire crackling, the mugs clinking softly, the wind brushing at the eaves. It was not a silence that asked for words, but one that carried comfort in its stillness. Klaus leaned back, resting his palms on the worn wood of the bench, feeling the grain beneath his fingers. His eyes traced the fire, watching the way flames curled upward, glowing and dimming in turns. It was a steady rhythm, ancient and familiar. His breath matched it without thought. Slow inhale, slow exhale, as though his chest were simply another log set upon the hearth, warmed and held. Outside, the village quieted further. The brook murmured in the distance, a constant thread of sound that had lulled Greendale to sleep for generations. Lanterns dimmed one by one, shutters closed. When Klaus finally rose, it was not because the evening had ended, but because his body asked for rest. He placed a coin on the table, though Merrick waved it off with a soft smile. "The fire is payment enough, my friend," the innkeeper said, his voice as warm as the embers themselves. Stepping outside, Klaus was met with the cool brush of night air. The cobblestones gleamed faintly with dew, and the quiet was full, not empty, but filled with the soft companionship of crickets, the rustle of leaves, and the silver silence of stars. The moonlight spread across the thatched roofs, painting the village in a glow both gentle and timeless. Klaus walked slowly back to his cottage, his boots making steady, hollow taps against the stones. Each house he passed seemed to hum softly with rest. Lanterns dimmed, curtains drawn, the shapes of lives curled gently into sleep. His own door stood waiting, its wooden frame familiar beneath his hand as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was still, carrying the faint fragrance of mint from the sprig left on his table. He removed his cloak, set aside his gloves, and sat once more by his own small hearth. The fire within it was low but steady, glowing with the same patient rhythm as Merrick's great flame. Klaus stretched his legs toward it, leaned back into the chair, and let his breath fall into the quiet of the night. And so, the evening closed, not with an ending, but with a soft folding inward. Like a book laid gently aside, its story. Chapter 4, The Moonlit Path. Night in Greendale was never heavy. It did not press down with darkness, nor did it smother the village in shadow. Instead, it arrived like a soft quilt spread gently across the land, stitched with stars, bordered by the pale silver of the moon. Klaus had not planned to walk after the inn, but as he sat in his cottage, the quiet called to him. The embers in his hearth glowed low and steady, casting long, soft shadows across the walls. Yet the air outside seemed to beckon. There was no urgency, no reason other than the simple pull of night itself. And so, with his cloak gathered once more around his shoulders, he stepped into the stillness. The lane that wound through Greendale lay empty now, its cobblestones glimmering faintly with dew. The cottages slept in their hush, each shutter closed, each window glowing only with the faintest candlelight that soon dimmed away. The only sound was the murmur of the brook and the soft choir of crickets, steady and untroubled. Klaus walked slowly, each step measured, each breath deep. The air was cool but not sharp, carrying the scent of damp earth and faint wood smoke, with a trace of lavender drifting from the fields. Overhead, the stars scattered in abundance, their light clear and gentle. The moon hung high, a watchful guardian casting silver across the rooftops and fields, outlining every blade of grass with its glow. Beyond the cottages, the path led to the meadow. By day, it swayed with wild flowers, but by night it became something otherworldly. The grasses shimmered as though dusted with light, and the flowers folded themselves in a rest, their colors muted into soft shades of gray and silver. Fireflies drifted lazily among them, tiny lanterns blinking in unhurried patterns. Klaus paused to watch them, their glow rising and fading like breath, their movements slow enough to ease the heart. He followed the path upward, toward a low hill where the meadow met the sky. With each step, the village grew smaller behind him, its roofs blending into shadow until only the faint glimmer of Merrick's marked its presence. Ahead, the land opened wide, and the sky spread even wider, an endless expanse of velvet night. At the top of the hill stood an old oak, its branches stretching outward like arms cradling the stars. Its roots curled deep into the earth, grounding it as firmly as the hills themselves. Klaus approached and laid a hand upon its trunk, rough and cool beneath his fingers. For years, villagers had come here to watch the night sky, to breathe deeply, to let time slow until it no longer seemed to move at all. Beneath the oak lay a broad, flat stone, worn smooth by generations who had sat upon it. Klaus lowered himself carefully, his cloak pooling around him, and tilted his head toward the heavens. The stars greeted him in their quiet constellations. Some shone bright, sharp as pinpricks of silver. Others glimmered faintly, like whispers only half remembered. Together they formed shapes old and familiar, clusters that villagers spoke of in gentle stories. The shepherd's lantern, guiding lost travelers. The weaver's loom, whose threads were said to hold dreams, and the silent crown, always tilted, always waiting. Klaus breathed deeply, his chest rising and falling with the slow rhythm of the night. There was no urgency in the stars, no haste in the moon's path across the sky. Everything moved, yet moved. Klaus nodded, shifting slightly to make space beside him. The oak keeps watch well. She settled gracefully upon the stone, her shawl brushing the fabric of his cloak. For a long while, they said nothing, their silence shared rather than empty. Together, they looked upward, the sky reflected in their eyes, the constellations mirrored in stillness. After a time, Serena whispered, "When I was a child, I used to believe the stars were lanterns carried by guardians, souls watching over us as we slept." Klaus's lips curved faintly, a comforting thought. Perhaps they still are. The breeze drifted around them, gentle and cool. It carried with it the faint song of night birds, the murmur of the brook below, and the steady hum of insects among the grasses. The world seemed to breathe with them, a slow inhale and exhale, as though the valley itself had fallen into meditation. Serena folded her hands in her lap, her gaze soft. The meadow feels different at night, as though it remembers every step that has passed here, but chooses not to speak of them. "Perhaps it waits," Klaus replied, his voice low. "Not for answers, simply for presence." Their words faded again, leaving only the gentle chorus of night. Klaus tilted his head back once more, letting the starlight wash across him. It was not a light that demanded to be seen, but one that invited, soft, patient, eternal. Minutes slipped into hours, though neither marked them. Time under the stars was different, stretched thin, loosened like thread, unwinding. When at last Serena rose, her movement was slow, her shawl gathering moonlight as it slipped from her shoulders. "I should return," she said softly. "But thank you, Klaus, for sharing the quiet." He inclined his head, his voice steady. "The quiet is always here. We only need to step into it." She smiled faintly, then turned down the path, her figure melting into the silver shadows until she would. Klaus remained a while longer, the oak at his back, the stars above. He felt the roots beneath him anchoring him to the earth, and the vastness of the sky drawing him gently outward. Between the two, he rested, not pulled, not pressed, but simply held. When at last he descended the hill, the village lay in deep slumber, its rooftops silvered by moonlight, its streets hushed in peace. His boots pressed softly against the dew-dark stones, and with each step, the sounds of the night followed, the brook's steady voice, the hush of grass, the cricket's patient song. He reached his cottage and paused at the door. Overhead, the moon lingered, casting its glow across the threshold as if blessing the night's end. Klaus touched the wooden frame, then stepped inside. The embers in his hearth still glowed faintly, waiting. He added a log with slow care, watching as the flame caught and spread, its warmth curling gently through the room. He removed his cloak, draped it over the chair, and sat back, letting the fire and the night weave together. His eyes closed not from weariness, but from peace. The village of Greendale breathed around him, steady and sure, the moonlight folding itself across the rooftops like a second quilt. And within that stillness, Klaus drifted deeper into calm, his breath matching the rhythm of the fire, the brook, and the stars. Chapter 5. The Slumbering Square. The heart of Greendale lay in its village square, and by night, it breathed with a rhythm softer than any lullaby. Cobblestones stretched in neat, winding patterns, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, though now they shone silver with dew and moonlight. The fountain in the center gurgled quietly, its water clear even beneath the stars, each ripple reflecting fragments of the sky above. Klaus walked there after returning from a meadow. His boots made muted sounds against the stone, each step slow and measured, as though in respect for the stillness all around him. The square, so often filled with the gentle chatter of villagers by day, now held only silence, deep but welcoming. It was not an empty silence, it was full of rest. The inn, its shutters drawn, let slip a faint glow from the gaps, the warmth of the hearth still alive within. The bakery across the way exhaled a fragrance of bread that lingered faintly even after Isolde had closed her ovens for the night. Above the tailor's shop, a single candle flickered in the loft window, then dimmed, leaving the space to the silver wash of the moon. Klaus lowered himself onto the low stone rim of the fountain, letting his hand rest against the cool, smooth surface. The water's sound was steady, unhurried, like the breath of the village itself. He dipped his fingers lightly into the pool, the coolness of it a quiet reminder that the day was behind him, and the night held him gently in its care. From here, he could see the whole square. The cottages leaned softly toward one another, their thatched roofs outlined in pale silver. Smoke curled faintly from a few chimneys, remnants of the day's fires, trailing upward like threads weaving into the stars. Lanterns hung from posts, most dim, their flames little more than glows, trembling faintly in the breeze. The air was filled with small sounds that only the quiet could carry. The soft flutter of an owl's wings as it crossed the sky, the gentle sigh of the brook at the edge of the square, the occasional creak of wood as a shutter settled into place. Nothing hurried, nothing loud, only the village speaking in its language of rest. Klaus leaned back slightly, closing his eyes as the sounds wrapped around him. He thought of how many nights had passed just like this, each one folding gently into the next. He thought of the villagers, safe in their cottages, Serena beneath her shawl, Merrick dreaming after his long day's work, Isolde resting in the warmth of her bakery, Corvian perhaps humming himself into slumber with a tune. Each life tucked safely into the embrace of Greendale, as though the hills themselves had drawn the valley into their arms. Opening his eyes again, Klaus watched the stars mirrored in the fountain's water. The reflection shimmered faintly, breaking into fragments as ripples passed. Yet even fragmented, the stars seemed whole, their light never truly lost. He thought of what Serena had said earlier, that perhaps the stars were lanterns carried by guardians. Tonight, their lanterns seemed closer, as though they leaned in to watch over Greendale more tenderly. A soft movement caught Klaus's attention. From one of the cottages, a small cat slipped into the square, its fur pale in the moonlight. It padded silently across the cobblestones, tail flicking, pausing here and there to sniff at a shutter or curl against a bench. It seemed to belong to no one and everyone at once, a quiet guardian of the night. Klaus watched as it approached the fountain, lapped once at the water, then curled into a ball nearby, its eyes closing almost at once. The minutes stretched, unmeasured. The fountain's song never faltered, the stars never dimmed, the silence never pressed too deeply. Klaus sat as though woven into the square itself, part of the stillness, a keeper of its quiet. His thoughts, too, softened, not memories of past duties or far roads, but gentle reflections. The taste of mint tea, The laughter of Leora among the flowers, the warmth of bread at the inn. Each memory floated like a feather, light, resting briefly before drifting on. After some time, he rose from the fountain and began to walk the square. His steps traced the edges, past the inn, the bakery, the tailor, the smithy with its forge now cool and dark. He let his fingers brush against the wooden doors, the stone walls, the shutters. Each touch grounded him, reminded him of the simple truth, that life here moved without hurry, without fear. The night deepened, the moon climbing higher. Its silver glow touched the edges of the thatch, the tips of the cobblestones, even the ripples of the fountain. It was as though the village itself wore the moon as a crown, glowing not with grandeur, but with quiet dignity. Klaus paused once more at the fountain. The cat shifted in its sleep, but did not wake. He lowered himself to sit again, his cloak folding around him, and let his breath fall into rhythm with the water. Each rise and fall of his chest matched the fountain's murmur, matched the cricket's song, matched the very heartbeat of Greendale. Here, in the slumbering square, he felt entirely safe. The world beyond the hills might continue in its bustle, but none of that touched the valley tonight. Greendale was whole in its rest, complete in its peace. Chapter 6, The Dawn Awakens. Morning in Greendale never rushed. It came softly, layer upon layer, until the whole valley seemed to stir at once. The first light touched the hills, turning their outlines pale gold, before sliding slowly down into the meadow. The grasses shimmered with dew, each droplet catching the light like a jewel. The brook, steady through the night, now sparkled as the sun brushed its ripples, singing brighter than before. Klaus stirred from sleep as the light found his window. He opened his eyes not with a start, but with the ease of someone who trusted the morning to be kind. His small cottage was filled with soft gray light, filtering through the curtains, warming the wooden floor. The fire in the hearth had long since gone to embers, but the air was not cold. It held the gentle freshness of dawn. Rising slowly, Klaus poured water into a basin and washed his face, the coolness waking him fully. He dressed in quiet rhythm, fastening his tunic, pulling on his boots, folding his cloak across his shoulders. Every motion was unhurried, part of the ritual of greeting the day. When he stepped outside, the air wrapped around him like a clear song. The village was waking, though gently, without clamor. Smoke curled in thin lines from the first rekindled hearths. Doors opened with soft creaks as farmers and bakers stepped into the fresh light. Somewhere, a rooster called, its cry carrying across the valley, answered faintly by another in the distance. The square looked different in morning. Where the night had wrapped it in silver, the sun now painted it in warm gold. The fountain gleamed, its water flashing bright as it leapt into the air. The cobblestones shone damp with dew, drying slowly as the day grew. The cat that had curled near the fountain now stretched lazily, blinking in the light, before trotting toward the bakery door in search of crumbs. Isolde stood at her oven already, her hands dusted with flour, her smile as warm as the bread she set upon her windowsill to cool. "Good morning, Klaus," she called softly, her voice carrying across the square. "Good morning, Isolde," Klaus replied, pausing to inhale the fragrance of the loaves. The scent was deep and comforting, filling the square with its promise of nourishment. Merrick appeared soon after, stepping from the inn with a broom in hand, sweeping the stones with steady strokes. He raised a hand in greeting, his eyes still softened by sleep. "Another fair day," he said, his tone quiet, almost reverent. Klaus nodded. "The valley seems to cradle it gently." As he continued walking, Klaus noticed Leora gathering flowers again, her apron already bright with color. She moved carefully among the grasses at the edge of the square, humming to herself, her tune light as a bird's song. Serena, too, appeared with her shawl, carrying a basket for herbs. She waved to Klaus as she passed, her steps measured, her gaze serene. The sounds of morning blended together. The brook whispering, the rustle of leaves, the gentle creak of cart wheels as a farmer guided his oxen down the lane. Even the animals seemed to rise slowly, their movements calm, their voices soft. The entire village seemed to breathe as one, inhaling light, exhaling peace. Klaus wandered toward the meadow path once more, his boots brushing against damp grass. The dew clung to the tips, scattering tiny rainbows in the sunlight. Birds flitted overhead, darting between branches, their calls weaving into the music of dawn. Each note felt as though it had been placed carefully, not to awaken too sharply, but to invite the day to unfold. He paused beneath the same apple tree where he had stood the day before. Now, its leaves shimmered bright green, jeweled with moisture. A soft breeze passed through, shaking. Klaus closed his eyes and let one land upon his hand, cool and fleeting, a reminder of the night's passing. From the hill, the valley stretched wide in morning's embrace. The cottages clustered in their golden light, the fields rolled outward, and the brook wound its silver ribbon through them all. Beyond, the hills stood tall, their slopes bathed in brightness. The entire world seemed to glow with rest renewed. Klaus sat upon the wooden bench once more, the same one he had rested on in the meadow walk. This time, he leaned back more fully, letting the sun soak into his face, letting the warmth and the quiet seep into his very bones. His eyes traced the slow drift of clouds, their edges tinged with rose. Villagers passed along the path at intervals, each offering a nod or a word of greeting. No one hurried. A cart moved gently along the road. A shepherd guided sheep toward fresh grazing. Children carried small pails toward the brook, laughing softly as they splashed their hands in the water. The morning unfolded like a song without haste, each note placed exactly where it belonged. Klaus reached into his cloak and withdrew the sprig of mint Serena had given him, now dried at the edges but still fragrant. He lifted it to his nose, breathing in its freshness. The memory of yesterday's meadow walk returned, blending seamlessly with today's light. Past and present joined together, not as burdens, but as gentle companions. The bells of the village chapel rang softly then, 3 slow chimes, each carrying far into the valley. Their sound was not urgent. It was an invitation. The life of Greendale had returned, not loud, but steady, like the pulse of a heart. Klaus paused at the fountain once more, dipping his hands into the cool water, splashing his face lightly. The droplets shone in the morning sun before slipping away. He sat again on its rim, watching the village around him, feeling himself part of its rhythm. And as the day fully awakened, Klaus knew that in Greendale, no morning needed to be rushed, no hour needed to be counted. Time here belonged to the valley, and the valley offered it freely in light, in water, in warmth. The dawn had awakened Greendale gently, and in its glow, Klaus found himself renewed, ready not for tasks or journeys, but simply for another day of being held by the peace of the village. Chapter 7. The Gentle Hours of Midday. By the time the sun climbed high over Greendale, the valley seemed to glow from within. The warmth was not heavy nor harsh. It was tender, like a hand laid gently on the shoulder. Light spread across rooftops, gilded the edges of chimneys, and poured in golden sheets over the fields. Shadows shortened, drawing in close to the cottages, where vines and blossoms swayed lazily in the soft breeze. Klaus lingered near the fountain, his cloak folded beside him. The morning had carried him easily into these hours, and now the village hummed in a rhythm all its own. Not fast, never hurried, but steady, like a lullaby continuing into daylight. The square was alive, though not loud. Children darted in small circles, ribbons streaming from their hands as they chased one another across the cobblestones. Their laughter was light and airy, a sound that rose and drifted rather than pierced. A pair of mothers watched from a nearby bench, their hands busy with embroidery, their eyes soft with ease. Isolde moved back and forth between her bakery and the square, carrying trays of steaming bread, setting them neatly in wicker baskets for villagers to collect. The scent of loaves still warm from the oven hung in the air, mingling with the sweetness of honeycomb brought by a local beekeeper, his jars catching the sun like liquid amber. Merrick swept again outside the inn, though less out of need than habit. His strokes were slow, deliberate, each one measured as though it were part of a ritual rather than a chore. From within the inn came the faint sound of a lute, its notes drifting out through the open windows, filling the air with soft melody. Klaus rose, drawn to the sound. He stepped lightly across the square, his boots tapping gently against the stones, and entered the cool shade of the inn. Inside, the room was bathed in dim gold where sunlight filtered through shutters. A young minstrel sat near the hearth, plucking the lute strings with practiced ease. Each note shimmered, lingering just long enough before melting into the next. A few villagers sat scattered at the wooden tables, sipping from mugs of cider, their shoulders relaxed, their voices hushed. Merrick caught Klaus's eye and smiled faintly before returning to the doorway, sweeping in unhurried arcs. Klaus found a seat near the window, with a light pooled across the table. He ordered nothing, needing nothing, content to simply listen. The music curled gently around him, carrying his thoughts not far, but close, like leaves drifting in a slow current. His eyes softened, his breath deepened, and he let himself drift with the rhythm. After some time, he rose again and stepped back into the brightness. The square had shifted subtly, as though it too moved in time with the sun. Farmers now returned from their morning fields, carrying baskets of greens and fruit, their oxen resting in the shade of the trees. A few stalls were being set, their canvas shades flapping gently in the breeze, displaying goods for trade. Woven cloth, jars of honey, bundles of herbs, polished wooden trinkets. Leora knelt near the fountain, arranging fresh flowers in small vases for the stalls. Her apron brimmed with color, violets, daisies, and sprigs of lavender. She worked slowly, humming a tune that echoed faintly with a minstrel's melody, though perhaps she did not realize she was carrying it with her. Klaus approached and admired her careful work. "The square blooms brighter with your touch," he said softly. Leora glanced up, smiling. "The flowers are only reminders," she replied. "The valley itself does all the work." Her words settled into Klaus's mind like water into soil, simple, true, and calming. He left her to her arranging and wandered again, letting his steps carry him wherever the moment guided. Beyond the square, the fields stretched wide, alive with soft movement. Wheat swayed in steady waves, their golden heads bowing and rising in rhythm with the wind. Villagers moved among them, some bending low to tend, others walking the ridges with baskets in hand. The sound of their voices carried faintly, mingling with the rustle of stalks, but never breaking the calm. Klaus followed a dirt path that wound between rows of apple trees. Their branches were heavy with fruit, and the air was touched with the faint sweetness of ripeness. Bees moved lazily from blossom to blossom, their hum blending seamlessly with the afternoon stillness. He paused to rest his hand against a trunk, feeling the rough bark under his palm, solid and grounding. At the edge of the orchard stood a small bench beneath a trellis of ivy. Klaus sat, letting the quiet surround him. A single bird perched on the trellis, tilting its head as if in conversation before breaking into a low, warbling song. The tune was unhurried, winding and dipping like a stream, echoing the peace of the hours. Time seemed to stretch, yet not drag. Each moment passed gently, flowing into the next like a brook finding its way through smooth stones. The sun lingered in its arc, not yet leaning toward evening, holding the valley in its warm embrace. When Klaus returned to the square, the market stalls were fully set, though even here, trade was more like sharing. Villagers spoke softly, exchanging jars for cloth, bread for herbs, trinkets for fruit. Coins did change hands, but with laughter and nods, with gratitude spoken plainly. Serena stood by one stall, her basket full of green sprigs. She greeted Klaus with a slow bow of her head, her shawl slipping softly from her shoulders. "Do you gather each morning?" Klaus asked, pausing beside her stall. "Each day offers something new," Serena replied, tying a bundle with twine. "The earth is never in haste, yet it never fails to give." Her words, like Leora's earlier, settled into Klaus's mind as though they were part of the valley itself. Lessons that did not demand, but simply existed, waiting to be noticed. As the sun passed its highest point, a lull spread over Greendale. Some villagers retreated indoors, their shutters half drawn, their voices lowered. Others lingered in the shade of trees, eating quietly, sharing small portions of bread and cheese, drinking from clay mugs filled with fresh water. The square softened into stillness, broken only by the fountain's steady trickle. Klaus found his way back to the inn, where Merrick now rested in the doorway, his broom propped beside him. "The gentle hours," Merrick murmured, nodding toward the square. "They pass slower than the others, don't they?" Klaus agreed with a quiet smile. Slower, yet fuller. He took a seat near the fountain again, leaning back, closing his eyes as the warmth of the sun brushed over his face. Around him, the village moved softly, each action drawn out like a note in a long, soothing song. And so midday in Greendale passed, not with rush, not with demand, but with the slow unfolding of hours, each one a gift of stillness, each one carrying the valley gently onward. Chapter 8. Afternoon Shadows and Rest. The sun had begun its slow descent when the valley shifted again. Afternoon arrived in Greendale not as a jolt, but as a sigh, an easing of shoulders, a lengthening of shadows that crept across the square, stretching like fingers of velvet across cobblestone. The air softened, no longer bright and sharp, but mellow, its warmth turning golden and drowsy. Klaus had lingered by the fountain through much of midday, and now, as the hours turned, he rose once more to walk the quiet paths. His boots brushed against the cobbles with muted taps, each step syncing with the rhythm of the brook, the whisper of breeze through ivy. The square was still, though not empty. The market stalls remained, but the bustle had softened. Traders leaned back on their stools, speaking in low tones, sipping water from clay mugs, their hands resting loosely in their laps. Children no longer chased ribbons, but sat beneath the trees in small circles, braiding grasses together, their laughter quiet, subdued as if the afternoon itself had asked for gentleness. The bakery window was open, and Isolde sat beside it on a small stool, her apron folded neatly over her lap. She hummed a tune while peeling apples, each slice falling into a bowl with a soft sound. When Klaus passed, she looked up, smiled warmly, and returned to her rhythm, her hands moving in a slow, practiced pattern. Near the inn, Merrick had set aside his broom. He now sat in the doorway, his legs stretched out, his gaze turned toward the hills. In his lap rested a small book, its pages yellowed with years. He turned them idly, not as one seeking to finish a story, but as one content to read a few lines and let the words linger. His lips moved silently, forming phrases, before Klaus drifted beyond the square toward the orchard again. The apple trees, bright with morning, now carried a deeper hue, their leaves shifting into shades of shadowed green. The ground was warm beneath them, the grass dry where the dew had vanished hours ago. A few villagers lay on blankets beneath the branches, resting with eyes half closed, their hats tipped over their faces, their bodies curled in postures of easy slumber. The brook sparkled still, but with less urgency, its ripples softened by the low angle of the sun. Dragonflies hovered over its surface, their wings catching light like tiny shards of glass. The hum of bees had slowed, their movements more measured, as though they too felt the valley's drowsiness. Klaus followed the water's edge until he reached a small wooden bridge. He paused at its center, leaning lightly on the railing, listening to the brook beneath. The sound was steady, hypnotic, each splash and swirl weaving into the soft fabric of the afternoon. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, filling his chest with the warm air, letting it go slowly until it seemed to carry a part of his weight away. When he opened his eyes, he saw Serena walking along the far bank, her shawl drawn loosely around her shoulders despite the warmth. She carried no basket this time, only a staff of polished wood, smooth from years of use. Her steps were slow, unhurried, as though she walked in rhythm with the brook itself. She raised a hand in greeting, and Klaus answered with a nod. Neither spoke, for no words were needed. The silence between them was not empty, but full, woven with the sounds of water, wind, and distant birds. Klaus lingered on the bridge even after Serena had passed from sight. The hours stretched around him, not pressing forward, but unfolding like the pages of Merrick's book, one after the other, each line drawn in golden ink. When he returned to the square, the stalls were being gently dismantled. Merchants folded canvas shades, their motions slow and careful. Leora gathered her remaining flowers, tying them into small bundles, offering them to passers-by with a soft smile before heading homeward. Children carried their braided grass crowns proudly, their heads crowned with uneven rings, their joy quiet yet certain. The inn's door stood open, and the faint sound of the lute drifted once more into the air. This time the tune was slower, drawn out, as though the musician too had fallen under the spell of the afternoon. The notes curved gently, like shadows stretching across the square, holding everything in soft embrace. Klaus found a place beneath the large elm tree at the square's edge, where the shade gathered thick and cool. He sat upon the grass, his back resting against the trunk, his cloak folded under him. the bark pressed into his shoulders, grounding him, anchoring him to the earth. Overhead, the leaves stirred lightly, their edges catching light that flickered in patches across his face. Voices moved around him, not loud, but steady. Snippets of conversation, the clink of mugs, the creak of wooden wheels as a cart rolled slowly past. Each sound arrived gently, like ripples spreading across water, fading without urgency. Klaus closed his eyes again, letting the shade and sound carry him into stillness. His breathing slowed, his mind wandered in soft spirals, neither grasping at thoughts nor pushing them away. He felt the weight of the day ease into his bones, not as weariness but as rest, as though the valley itself breathed through him. At some point, he drifted into a half-sleep. Time slid gently, unnoticed, until he stirred again, opening his eyes to see that the sun had lowered further, its light now a warm amber spilling across the square. The shadows had grown long, reaching from one side of the village to the other, painting the cobblestones in bands of gold and shade. The villagers moved slowly still, their motions quiet, as if unwilling to disturb the peace that had settled so deeply. Even the animals seemed hushed. The oxen grazed silently in their pens. Chapter 9, Twilight Lanterns and Evening Calm. The afternoon shadows stretched long fingers across the cobbled lanes of Greendale, reaching slowly, steadily, until they joined one another, hand in hand, to weave the cloak of evening. The last rays of the sun lingered at the hilltops as though reluctant to leave, painting the horizon in delicate strokes of rose and violet. Above, the first threads of indigo stretched across the sky, deepening as though dipped in some quiet, endless well. The air cooled gently, carrying scents that belonged only to twilight. Wood smoke curling from hearths, flowers folding their petals with sighs, and the earthy sweetness of grass exhaling the warmth of the day. Klaus rose slowly from beneath the great elm, where he had rested since late afternoon. A few blades of grass clung to his cloak as he brushed them away with unhurried motions. His legs felt loose, relaxed from stillness, and as he began to walk toward the square, each step carried him into the slow rhythm that the entire village now seemed to share. The cobblestones underfoot shimmered faintly, still holding the last golden dust of the sun. Here and there, puddles from the brook's overflow reflected the sky, mirrors that caught pink, violet, and the first traces of silver. The fountain waited at the heart of the square, singing in low, liquid tones, its water turning from gold to pale blue, then to shadows with glints of light. It seemed almost alive, one of Greendale's steady voices, softening into evening with the rest. Around him, the cottages stirred in their twilight rhythm. Wooden shutters creaked closed, their sound hushed, not sharp. From within houses came the glow of candles, each one lit with careful hands. The hearths crackled awake again after their afternoon lull, smoke drifting from chimneys in thin ribbons that twined into the cooling sky. The square itself, so lively under the sun, became something gentler now. Children who had laughed and run at midday now clung to their parents' hands, their games reduced to whispers, their steps to slow skips. Neighbors met one another with soft greetings, voices low as though already respectful of the night's approach. Then the lanterns began. Merrick was always first. with steady patience. He carried his taper from post to post, its flame cupped against the breeze by his hand. One by one, the lanterns flared awake, not sharply but tenderly, as though remembering how to glow. Their golden circles spilled across stone and wall, overlapping, weaving the square in light. They were not bright enough to erase shadow, only to soften it, leaving every corner touched with warmth. Soon, Greendale's heart was ringed with this gentle constellation, echoing the stars that had just begun to appear overhead. Klaus paused at the fountain's rim to watch them bloom. The lantern flames shimmered upon the water's ripples, breaking into dozens of smaller sparks, as if stars themselves had fallen to float upon its surface. The sight brought a hush even deeper into the air, and Klaus let his hands rest loosely upon his knees, his breath slowing to match the quiet rhythm of the village. Isolde, flowers still dusted faintly upon her sleeves, closed the shutters of her bakery with care. The final loaves of the day cooled upon their shelves, their crusts giving off a fading warmth. Their scent carried into the square as though offering a last blessing. She stepped out. Another gentle evening, she murmured as Klaus passed her door. He met her gaze, nodding, and offered her a calm smile. It seems Greendale knows no other kind. She smiled in return, then slipped quietly inside, leaving the night to its embrace. Elsewhere, Leora made her slow way home, her basket of flowers lighter now, petals muted in twilight's shade. She had left little posies at doors across the village, her quiet gifts waiting to greet families when they rose again at dawn. Serena walked along the brook, shawl drawn close, her staff tapping lightly against the path. She moved at the same pace as the evening itself, measured, steady, unhurried, as if she belonged to its flow as much as the brook or the lanterns did. Klaus lingered at the fountain until the stars above grew thicker. They began faint, pale, then gathered into brilliance, each one burning with ancient patience. He tilted his head back, watching them spread across the heavens, a story without hurry, written in silver lines too vast to read all at once. The lanterns and the stars seemed to answer each other, earth and sky meeting in light. The village softened further, children's voices quieted, replaced by the sound of mothers humming lullabies from open windows. Animals stirred in their pens, an ox lying heavily in the straw, sheep curling close, the baker's cat stretching before it curled itself by the warm door. The square breathed like a single being, everything settling, everything resting. The tune he played seemed more a part of his breathing than a performance. Klaus rose at last, his body moving as though in answer to the sky. He walked down the lane, leading away from the square, his boots brushing faintly against the cobbles. Past the cottages, past the brook, the meadow stretched open beneath the rising moon. Moonlight lay across the fields like a silver veil, catching each blade of grass until they seemed dusted with frost. Fireflies rose here and there, their glow brief but tender, rising and falling in a rhythm that echoed the stars above. The brook moved quieter now, its surface dark but glistening, its voice soft as a sigh. Klaus reached the old wooden bench at the meadow's edge, the same place he had rested many evenings before. From here, Greendale appeared distant yet still close enough to warm him. The lanterns glowed like golden beads in the square. The chimney smoke curled like threads. The windows flickered with hearthlight. Above, the sky widened, stars crowding nearer, the moon climbing higher. And yet, though the world was vast, Klaus felt no smallness, only that he was held, cradled, by the village, by the valley, by the quiet itself. He leaned back upon the bench, shoulders loosening, eyes softening as he looked upward. His breaths grew deeper, slower. Around him, the night was alive, but alive only in ways that soothed. Crickets calling steadily, brook whispering faintly, fireflies pulsing like tiny hearts of light. The air was— "You sit as if the night belongs to you," she said softly. Klaus smiled faintly, his voice low. "It feels as though it belongs to us all." Serena nodded, gazing at the stars. "That is Greendale's gift. The day to work, the night to rest. Both blessings, both steady." She touched her staff lightly to the ground, then moved onward, her figure blending with the meadow, dissolving into the shadows until she was only another part of the night. Klaus remained. Tom slipped past him unnoticed. The stars grew thicker, brighter. The lanterns in the square dimmed faintly as oil burned low. The lute in the inn grew quieter, slower, until even that thread of music stilled. And still the peace remained, wrapping the village, wrapping the meadow, wrapping Klaus himself. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen. And what he heard was not silence, but balance. The fountain's murmur, the brook's sigh, the cricket's rhythm, the breath of the night itself. All of Greendale whispered the same wordless truth. Sleep, all is safe. Sleep, all is well. And so Klaus breathed deeply of lantern light and moonlight both, feeling himself carried inward, not away, toward a place of rest that asked nothing of him but stillness. Chapter 10, The Night's Embrace. Night in Greendale deepened slowly, tenderly, as if it, too, loved the valley too much to arrive all at once. It did not fall with weight, nor sweep in with force. Instead, it crept softly along the rooftops, brushed gently through the trees, and laid itself down over the cobbles and meadows like a blanket woven from shadow and silver. Every stone, every tree, every cottage and path seemed tucked beneath it, safe, wrapped into a hush so complete that the quiet itself seemed to hum. The lanterns in the square flickered lower, their oil burning slowly, their flames no longer eager but steady, subdued, glowing with the patience of guardians who keep watch through the long hours. Pools of gold spread across the cobblestones, overlapping one another like circles upon calm water. The fountain continued its song, softer now, no longer sparkling with sun, but whispering with moon. The ripples moved gently, catching lantern light in pale arcs that shimmered like ghostly stars upon the surface. Even the water seemed to lower its voice, speaking not to the day, but to dreams. Above, the moon climbed higher into the darkened sky. It was round and silver, its glow steady, protective, neither cold nor distant. It seemed to lean over Greendale itself, casting its light across rooftops and fields as a shepherd casts his cloak across his flock. The village rested beneath it, as if beneath a watchful hand, every corner touched by its glow. Klaus walked slowly from the meadow's edge back toward the heart of the village. His steps made no sound, but he felt each one echo lightly in his chest, a rhythm that matched the hush of the night. His cloak trailed behind him, brushing the dew-tipped grasses along the lane. The earth was damp, sweet-scented, carrying the faint perfume of lavender drifting from Serena's gardens. The richness of soil, each breath he drew was deep, clean, and calming, as though even the air itself wished to soothe. The square lay quiet when he arrived, though not empty. Merrick had closed the inn's shutters, but he lingered outside, settled into a chair tilted back upon two legs. His gaze lifted to the heavens, following the slow passage of stars across the night. He raised a hand when Klaus passed, the movement small, unhurried, more felt than seen in the lantern glow. No words followed, for none were needed. Silence was greeting enough, and silence carried all that was meant. Isolde's bakery stood dark now, save for one flickering candle left burning within. Through the half-open shutter, Klaus glimpsed her resting in her chair, her apron folded neatly, her flour-dusted hands resting loosely in her lap. Her eyelids lowered slowly, then closed, her breathing deepening into rhythm with the quiet around her. On her shelves, the last loaves of the day cooled, their golden crusts fading into shadow, their fragrance mingling with the faint perfume of flowers carried on the wind. Leora's blossoms stood waiting in vases upon windowsills, petals muted now in moonlight. Their fragrance drifted faint but steady, a gentle offering to the night. The square as a whole seemed wrapped in a cradle of breath, the slow, steady breathing of dozens of lives turning toward rest, each cottage another heartbeat in Greendale slumber. Klaus lowered himself once more onto the fountain's rim. His hands rested upon his knees, his head tilted back to gaze upward. Above him stretched the heavens, vast and endless, stars spilling like rivers of silver across the darkness. They did not blink nor waver. They held their places with ancient patience, watching, waiting. Klaus breathed slowly, deeply, letting the sight fill him, and instead of smallness, he felt only. The brook's voice carried faintly even here, its thread of sound winding through the square, adding its note to the fountain's song. The crickets continued their rhythm, steady and unbroken, while the leaves of the elm sighed softly whenever the breeze stirred them. The night was not silence. It was a lullaby of many small voices blending together, never hurried, never sharp, all stitched into the tapestry of Greendale's rest. When at last Klaus rose again, he walked a path between the cottages. His boots brushed quietly over stone and grass. At one window, he paused, listening to a mother's low lullaby. The words were blurred by walls, but the tone carried clearly, gentle, wool soft, wrapping her child in safety. At another window, he saw the faint flicker of a candle, its flame bowing lower, until it too dimmed away, leaving the steady glow of lanterns outside to hold the darkness at bay. Everywhere he passed, the village folded inward, its eyes closing one by one, surrendering to the valley's embrace. At last, he reached his own cottage, small and sturdy, its door plain, its roof silvered by the moon. A single window glowed faintly where his hearth's embers waited to greet him. He stepped inside, and the familiar scent of wood, wool, and linen filled the air. Warmth clung to the walls, a quiet kind, no longer fire-bright, but soft and lingering. The small space welcomed him as though it had always known he would return. He set his cloak upon its peg, unfastened his boots, and moved with the easy rhythm of nightly habit. He set aside his basin, folded his tunic neatly, smoothed the blanket across his bed. Each motion was slow, gentle, unforced, as though each action was its own form of rest. The hearth still held a faint glow, coals pulsing like sleeping hearts. He placed a small log upon them, and it caught slowly, patiently, its flame rising with the unhurried. The amber light filled the cottage in soft, uneven waves, flickering across the walls, mingling with the silver moonbeams that slipped through the window. Firelight and moonlight joined hands, weaving the room into a cradle of warmth and glow. Klaus sat at the edge of his bed, his hands resting loosely in his lap. His gaze moved across the little room. The shelf with its folded linens, the wooden chair by the door, the hearth with its steady glow. Everything felt balanced, neither too much nor too little. He breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the day leave him, not as burden dropping away, but as a quiet invitation to let go. At last, he lay down, drawing the blanket up to his shoulders. The fabric was soft and familiar, carrying the faint scent of lavender, perhaps left by Serena when she had blessed the cloth earlier in the season. The pillow cradled his head gently, molding itself to his shape. He turned toward the window, where the moon hung high, framed perfectly by the dark curve of the hills. His eyes grew heavy as he gazed upon it, lids lowering slowly, his breath deepening into rhythm with the night. The fountain's murmur reached him faintly, blended with the cricket's song, blended with the sigh of leaves outside. Each sound layered over the next until they became one, an endless hush, a lullaby too large for words. Greendale slept around him. The square, the meadow, the orchard, the brook, all lay beneath the valley's embrace. No worry stirred, no shadow threatened, only the quiet certainty that dawn would return as it always had, soft and patient, gentle as breath. And so, with the moon as his watchman and the valley as his cradle, Klaus let his eyes close. He surrendered not to darkness, but to light made soft, to sound made gentle, to a peace deeper than dreams. The night held him as it held all of Greendale, and within its arms